Thank you very much. Well, welcome everybody to the Inspire stage. We aim to fill you with the urge or ability to do or feel something, especially to doing something creative. My name is Vanisha Mutusami. Our co-host today is Sarah Beckwith. Sarah, say hi.
Afternoon, everyone.
Or afternoon. And our Zoom master is Christian Collinson. Say hello or afternoon, Christian.
Good afternoon and hello.
Yes, indeed. Hello. And yes, you will be hearing more from Sarah later because Sarah will be closing the session whilst I will be opening it today. Well, to kick us off, I thought, how about we have a post-lunch game? I hope you've digested your lunch quite nicely, but how about we play a little game? So in order for us to play that little game, I'd like you to get hold of a piece of writing material. It could be a piece of paper, or these days it could be your iPad and your Apple pen, or a bit of paper, or a quill, or anything that you write with. And grab hold of that, and let's kick off our little game. So the first question is, well, I'd like you to write down the names of your 5 best friends. Exclude your relatives. I repeat, write down the name of your 5 best friends and exclude any relatives. And when you've done so, if you could just pop it in the chat and say yes. Now, strike off the names of anyone from your home city. Strike off the names of anyone from your home city. In the remaining list, strike off anyone from your own race or ethnicity. So in the remaining list, strike off anyone from your own race or ethnicity. In the remaining list, strike off anyone who follows the same religion as you. Strike off anyone who follows the same religion as you. Now, count the number of names that still remain on your list. Count the number of names that still remain on your list. Multiply that number by 20. Multiply that number by 20. And what you get is called your diversity quotient. This test is a quick indicator of the influences that you have as you connect with people. It's a good inventory of your own persona. Just it's a great way to provide yourself with some feedback about your diversity and inclusion. Which reminds me of our next speaker today. Well, she is an engineer by trade and a diversity, equity, and inclusion professional by choice. With a successful 2-decade career in the international energy industry, and having been one of the few women in her field, she has made it her life's work to create diverse, inclusive, and equitable workplaces through research, best practice, and lived experiences. She is passionate about reconciling the academic perspective with practical application to enable organizations to elevate their DEI, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, and change the workplace landscape through activities with the greatest impact. In 2016, she founded Two Peers Consulting to support underrepresented communities in the workforce and provide companies the tools and strategies to effectively create and grow truly diverse and inclusive workplace. Please welcome Erica Doramo.
Hello. I just want to say I'm really excited about today. Initially, when I had the invitation to come present, I thought, Toastmasters, these are folks who are really good at speaking, who do this, for fun and kind of know all the tricks of the trade. Do I really want to put myself up in front of that group? And I thought, yeah, I do, because this organization has such a growth mindset that really resonates with me. And so I thought, absolutely, this is something I'm super passionate about. The more, the merrier. And I love the ethos of the organization. So thank you for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen, and we'll talk through a couple minor logistic things. There we go. Okay. So today's session, the slides are going to be pretty sparse. It's going to be mostly talking. If you decide you want to actually minimize the slides a little bit, expand the video a bit more, that's cool. I did want to put some slides up there though, because we're going to do some polling. So normally I think presenters want you to put your phones away perhaps, but in this case, we want your phones front and center because we're going to do some polling and you can interact using your phone. You can either interact using a URL, or you can interact doing text messaging. So don't put your phone away, have that ready. And I think the link will be in the chat. And another comment, we're not gonna do a formal Q&A as part of the session, but we will stop throughout the session to just check the chat. So if you do have a question, pop it in the chat. I'll see the chat after the session and can, I'd be more than happy to kind of stay after for a few minutes and talk through any questions. You can also follow up with me after the session. I would be more than happy to chat about anything we discuss. But as we check the chat, we'll pick one or two comments to kind of address or questions to address and keep moving. 30 minutes is such a short, succinct time that we'll be doing a high level presentation here. So yeah, feel free to inquire more if you want a deeper dive. All right, so DEI then and now. DEI, as mentioned, is diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is a lot of syllables. So you'll hear me sometimes shorten it to DEI or even D&I for short. We'll talk a little bit more about those acronyms in a moment. A little bit of housekeeping. So this is not any kind of legal advice. Can't guarantee that if you follow, there's no advice here that if you follow it, we can guarantee results or anything like that. So my legal counsel, insists we put that up there. All right, so the journey. Today we'll talk about, a backwards looking review of what diversity and inclusion initiatives have been in the past and kind of the evolution of them. We'll look at the present. And when I say present, I mean sort of the last 2 years or so. There's been a lot of upheaval, a lot of societal change, and there's been a pandemic that's had quite an impact. And then we'll look at the future. So where are we headed? What are some of those trends that we want to see continue? And then what are some of the changes that we feel we need? And what do we want out of this session? So my hope is that anyone attending comes away with a better understanding of the evolution of workplace diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, kind of the history where we've come from, and recognizes some of the current influences and developments that are happening right in front of our eyes. And lastly, I want people to feel more empowered to be an agent of change. So if you understand where we've come from and you understand where we're at now, hopefully you can be one of the people moving us forward. Okay, so first poll question comes up fast. We want you to either visit this URL or text Erica D203 to one of these numbers. I think almost everybody is probably in the UK, but I try not to make too many assumptions. And when we get to the next slide, a question will come up, I'll activate it, and then you'll be able to respond. Okay. So giving people a moment to kind of get logged in there. All right, now, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being none and 5 being expert, how would you rate your current understanding of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives? I'm going to minimize the video just so I can see results. Okay, I'm hiding responses because I don't want to bias anyone's answer. We've got some responses in. Okay, C. So we've kind of, that seems like a primary answer here. Some middle understanding, not a lot of super experts. Well, nobody is counting themselves as a super expert, even if we maybe have some super experts hidden in the audience. But everyone seems to have an awareness, so that's good. Okay. When you hear the term diversity, equity, and inclusion, what words or feelings come to mind? Oh, I love these words. These are really positive words. Let's see. Okay, we've got some good responses here. This is not always how we see these words coming through, by the way. A lot of times we see some less positive words. Yep, so some neutral words like change, awareness, curious. I love curiosity. In fact, there was a McKinsey study that came out recently about emotional labor in the workplace and the value of curiosity when dealing with our colleagues and coworkers. Nice. I like these words. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one. So excluding the past 18 months, which is kind of a bit of an anomaly, to what extent do you feel diversity initiatives have been effective? And I will activate this. And this is just free form answer. So there is no right answer. Just whatever comes to top of mind. We'll start sharing some responses. Yeah, I think this is representative of that kind of selection of C as like the middle ground for how aware we are about diversity and inclusion initiatives, because for folks who are not very familiar with diversity and inclusion initiatives, a lot of times there's an assumption that we've made a lot more progress than what we actually have. Cool. And I see we have some comments in the chat, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. So the evolution, what is diversity? What's D&I? What are these acronyms that we keep hearing? Well, originally, we heard a lot of talk about diversity in the workplace. And when we trace that back to the sort of like the origin of where we first saw diversity in the workplace, or diversity measures in the workplace, back in 1948, in the US, President Truman signed an executive order that desegregated the armed forces. And that's kind of what scholars point to as one of the initial workplace diversity initiatives. But it's changed a lot over the past decades, and we've seen the focus of diversity shift to diversity and inclusion, where we recognize that simply having the numbers there doesn't make for the benefits that diversity brings if people can't bring their whole selves to work. So that's the inclusion part, that we want to celebrate differences, not accept people in spite of their differences. And then more recently, we've seen equality be tied into this concept, because if we have diversity and we have inclusion, but we aren't treating people equitably, we aren't giving them the same opportunities, the same reward structure, then we're really not doing justice to diversity and inclusion. And more recently, we've seen a B added on to this acronym as well. So diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So that belongingness also kind of ties into inclusion, but it takes it a step further. So what was entailed in diversity and inclusion initiatives before? A lot of times it was really focused on lagging indicators. So, percentages of certain demographics and, how we were performing against goals for set targets of those percentages. Not necessarily a lot of look at how effectively we were incorporating people into the community, how effectively we were developing people, not a lot of look at how the culture had shifted or how we were leveraging people's differences, but really a focus on sort of that lagging indicator. And I like to use an analogy of a garden. So if I have a garden and my tomatoes are doing great, and I try to plant something like broccoli in there, and the broccoli just isn't surviving, and I say, oh, okay, well, we don't have enough broccoli this year, like it didn't survive, our numbers are really low. I'm just going to keep planting more broccoli and more broccoli, and year after year it just still doesn't survive. And we would never do that, right? We would look at the soil and we'd say, what is it about this that's not allowing these different organisms to thrive? And so that's some of the expanded conversation that we would like to see around D&I, but we'll get to that later. So how was it measured? Again, it was measured looking at these lagging indicators, and it was really focused on BRGs, business resource groups, or ERGs, employee resource groups, which are great. I think it's great for employees to have an opportunity to connect with each other, share their lived experiences, and gain support that way. But fundamentally, what BRGs and ERGs are doing, if that's all that is involved in a D&I program, is it's sort of asking the employees that are being affected by disparity to go fix their own problem. And sometimes these programs are really underfunded and they're not actually given any sort of authority or decision-making power within the company. Sometimes they'll have an executive sponsor and they sort of have that line of communication to management, but they don't have authority or decision-making power to change the culture of the company. So what we did see, though, was a lot of sort of mission accomplished. There's this image, like a meme of former US President George Bush on like a naval destroyer with a big banner that says mission accomplished. It's kind of a joke because actually the war that he was talking about ended up going on for another 2 decades. And I feel like that's kind of emblematic sometimes of diversity and inclusion initiatives when we see companies and their branding have lots of photos of diversity. All over the elevator bays, all over the lobbies of buildings, we see photos of diverse employees. But then when we go and look at the actual workforce, that's not representative. And so it gives people a sense that we're much farther along than we are. And I'm all about, if you can see it, you can be it. Representation matters. And also we need to be real about where we're at. Okay, so we're going to get to the next question, the next polling question. So which most closely describes how you feel as an individual you've been impacted by diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives of the past? Okay, these percentages are shifting quite a bit. It's complicated. Yeah, I put that one in there because it is often complicated. We're not seeing a lot of people feeling as though they individually have been positively impacted by diversity and inclusion. And that is certainly consistent with what studies have shown. And in fact, what a specific study that I participated in and was a project manager for that looked at not only the career choices and motivations of men and women in the workforce from the lens of gender, but also how effective diversity and inclusion initiatives were. What we saw was that men felt that there was a significant difference in the views or the perception of how effective diversity and inclusion initiatives could be. Women felt much more strongly than men that D&I could have a positive business impact, while men felt that diversity and inclusion initiatives, were already, I'm making generalizations here, but the work had already been done. They had already been much more successful than what women had viewed them as, and B, that they were negatively impacted. So both men and women replied that they felt that they had been negatively impacted. So clearly we're not doing something right here. Okay, let's take a quick break from that though and check the chat. So Vanessian. I can check the chat.
Okay, we've got some coming in. Okay, we've got some
cool
question here from Christian actually. I lead a business LGBTQIA ERG, and that's the problem I've been raising, that we can't achieve change unless the company works with us to change the culture. So we've teamed up with all of our ERGs to make sure we're heard. Now we have the ear of the CEO as of a few weeks ago, and really hoping we can make real change. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And
positive move.
Yeah, that's great. It's interesting though, because that ERG is probably not new, right? It's probably been around for a period of time, and you guys have come together to force that change and to have the reckoning, to have the listening happen. But that's like volunteer work that's being done by these ERGs, by the employees in the ERGs, that's not paid labor. And yeah, the intention and the effort there is really to have a positive impact for the sake of the business. So yes, the shift away from ERGs simply being like meeting groups that can chat to being action oriented, getting the ear of the management, the executives, and making change happen. That's great.
Okay, and we have another question here from Rob Dewing in respect to small businesses, and Rob was saying that he doesn't really get to be involved in E&D initiatives. Oh
yeah, I mean, as a small business owner myself, I really do put D&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion, actually front and foremost for me, because I'm conscious that I'm at a big disadvantage being such a small entity that I don't have access to other viewpoints necessarily. And so I make a concerted effort that whether it's my suppliers that I bring on board, my various support functions that I interact with, or interns that I bring in-house, I make sure that I'm supplementing with the various lived experiences that I wouldn't necessarily have access to myself. So while we're looking at a corporate perspective of diversity and inclusion in the workplace, that's not dependent necessarily on a large company.
Okay, and we have another question there from Lily Bai. It's really understanding, well, who are the leading researchers in D&I field, and also whose study results shall we refer to make more effective?
Yeah, McKinsey has done a lot of really good research on this topic. So they have one study called Women in the Workplace, but it also looks at the topic from an intersectional point of view. So it also looks at diversity from an ethnic perspective as well. The Brookings Institute is another good source of data, and Catalyst.org is another great source for diversity and inclusion data. And also these are just like groups that are on the cutting edge sort of research, really data driven.
Okay, excellent. And we've got a part 2 of that question from Lidibai. It's about well, how do we how should we focus on now to have more effective D&I strategy initiatives?
Yes, that's what I want to move on to. So we've not a lot of time left, but I'm going to we're gonna cover some of this. So what's happening now? Societal reckoning, right? There's been a lot of upheaval and change in the last 18 months even. We've seen back in 2017, we saw a lot around #MeToo. That actually started in 2006, but gained prominence in 2017 with the Harvey Weinstein trial. We have seen Black Lives Matter, protests throughout the world, actually, through 2020. That initiated in 2013 with the Trayvon Martin killing and the acquittal of the person who killed him. And it's resurged too. In 2015, there were Black Lives Matter protests. In 2017, it's continued, but in 2020, it really gained prominence. And we saw companies reacting to that. We've seen a lot of increased visibility and awareness around topics like, anti-Asian hate crimes and violence in the face of the pandemic. We've also seen an increased awareness around things like neurodiversity, the stuff that's below the surface that you can't necessarily see when you meet somebody. So neurodiversity, some of the elements of gender have really gained some prominence. So in the pandemic, we've seen good and bad as well. We've seen a lot of these companies in the face of Black Lives Matter make statements. They have come out and said, we support this anti-racist book club. We are going to hire a diversity and inclusion lead. We're going to hire a champion, or we're going to add to somebody else's existing responsibilities. What we haven't seen, though, necessarily is those champions, those leads, be given the authority that such an imperative business initiative should have. In the face of the pandemic, we've really seen a shift to remote working, which has been, good and bad. We've had upsides and downsides to that. We've certainly seen the flattening of organizations and how information is conveyed, which has been great for people who were perhaps not in the in circle, people who have additional responsibilities in the home and are trying to juggle a lot. Now, there's been a much less stigma, a great decrease in stigma around flexible working arrangements, working from home. And we've gotten to know our colleagues as full humans with all of their, bits and pieces from their living rooms, from their kitchens, dealing with their children and homeschooling. And we've just gotten to know much more about them. We've also seen, though, that, participation in the labor force by women has decreased to levels we haven't seen since the 1980s. So we've lost like 35 years of progress. Really, the communities that have been affected the most by the pandemic from both health outcomes and economic outcomes have been those that were already marginalized. So communities of color and women. So that's kind of what's happening now. But we're going to talk about what we want to see improve. And actually, I'm going to skip this polling question just to make sure that we can cover some of the future stuff. So I'm also going to skip this chat check as well. So where we're headed, a continuation of some of these trends, right? So we're expecting that the 9 to 5, Monday through Friday in the office is probably going to give way to a hybrid model of working. Much less required travel. So people who either have health issues, who have home care responsibilities, who aren't able to travel as much will not necessarily be as affected. We're seeing a lot of advancement in technology that can help propel diversity and inclusion in the workplace. So we have the ability now to intervene in our own unconscious biases, which, by the way, knowing that you have an unconscious bias is a great first step, but it doesn't actually do anything to inhibit that bias. what's needed and what you get from knowing that you have an unconscious bias is that you can put a system or a process in place. So technology is allowing us to do that now. We can sanitize resumes when we're hiring. We can, to remove gender and ethnicity details to really give people an unbiased view of the candidate. We can also be using AI to identify whether appraisals are biased. We know that women get appraised and they get feedback much more on their behaviors and not necessarily their technical skills. Same with ethnicity. It can really bias how people are given their appraisals. We're also seeing this more holistic approach. So it's not just gender, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation. We're seeing that it's intersectional, and that we do best for companies when we bring people in as their whole selves. That's how we actually get the benefit of diversity and inclusion that it entails. So what we want to see in the future is companies really measuring this and supporting it financially with the resources that it warrants for something that is so critical to a business. We would never have volunteers handle our audits, right? We would never have that be like a nights and weekends approach. We would pay people to do that. We would pay professionals, we would invest, we would reward people who delivered on that. So those are some of the things that we can see to improve the situation that we want to see going forward. Okay, I'm conscious that we are kind of coming up on time. So I want to give us a chance. We have two polling questions. We'll see if we can get through them. One is, what is one improvement that you'd like to see in how society approaches diversity, equity, and inclusion? And this is a free form, so feel free to just put a couple words in there. And we're going to be quick, so I'm going to move on from this very quickly. Okay, we'll show responses. No responses yet. Open-minded. Cool. Let's see, visual settings. Let's do a cluster instead. Yep, open-hearted. I love that. More leaders from diverse backgrounds. Love that too. Okay, let's move on. We'll skip that chat check. Here we go. Some further reading that I wanted to provide in case people are interested in this topic. Diversity Inc. is a great look at how diversity programs have done, how they've evolved, where they need to go, where they've been lacking, and where they're succeeding. And if you want to be a more inclusive leader, this book by Jennifer Brown is also really good, How to Be an Inclusive Leader. I think we are just up on time. Is that right, Vanishing?
No, you're okay for time. So yeah, you can.
Oh, okay. All
well,
right. So
yeah, you have 5 minutes, so maximum.
5 minutes. Okay. So in the past, we've seen that diversity and inclusion initiatives really were focused on just number outcomes. They were focused on sort of this philanthropic ethos of we're doing this for the sake of the disenfranchised groups, for the, you know, the underserved groups, when really the company itself is benefiting from diversity and inclusion. Right now, we've seen this reckoning in society and due to the pandemic as well, where a lot more conversation is happening, a lot more visibility is there, and we're seeing a lot more accountability as well from shareholders who are focused on ESG metrics, which means environment, social, and governance, and then from employees themselves. They are expecting more from their employers. And then where we're headed in the future. Really taking a holistic approach, understanding the business value. So, you know, not relying on volunteer work for the progression of diversity and inclusion, but holding leaders accountable and leveraging technology where we can to break down those barriers, to identify where we've had biases, systemic biases, and systemic disparity in the systems. Things like pay gap, transparency. This is all becoming much more standard. So this is, I think, the most important question, polling question. What is the one thing that you will do to help create diverse, equitable, and inclusive work environments in your organization. Talk about it. Yes. Be visible and loud. Yes. Keep spreading the word. Love it. Promote the issues through workshops. Yes. Bring in professionals. I mean, shameless plug here. People like me who have, done the research, dedicated themselves to understanding the theory behind this and the best practice, and not just relying on your already overworked and stressed out employees to volunteer to do this. Yep, keep promoting the benefits. Absolutely. Like, it really leads to better outcomes, happier employees, better retention, so many benefits. Okay. So just a reminder of our legal disclaimer, and then, what we offer. So like I said, I've dedicated myself to this public benefit corporation that I started, which is focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting. So helping companies to really fix the underlying issues that are resulting in these environments. But we also provide coaching for individuals. We provide workshops for individuals, open enrollment and private. And then we also have a lot of resources on our social media and on our podcast as well. So feel free to follow us and give us a listen. And with that, we can hand it over to either the chat Q&A, or if people want to come off of mute, I'm happy to stick around.
Thank you so much, Erica, for a wonderful session this afternoon. We are really, really grateful that you gave it your time to come and speak to us. And I love the fact of how you categorize the organization, the ethos of the organization of one for growing. And that is absolutely what it is. And the audience here all came here to learn and to grow. And I really appreciate what you said as well about being passionate about something. And as a Toastmaster, I think that's one of the biggest things you learn when you're speaking, is that if you're going to choose a topic that you're passionate about. And it is clear how passionate you are about this subject. And so thank you so much for sharing your passion about this with us. We really appreciate it, and for doing such an interactive session as well, because I think that's really important for everyone to engage. So it's been brilliantly engaging and interactive, and so just a huge thank you again. If everyone joined in with a round of applause for Erica. Yes,
thank you for having me. Thank you. Feel free to reach out for anyone who had a question that they didn't want to put it in the chat, didn't feel comfortable. It is a safe space, so I am more than happy to have an offline conversation as well.